Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Nurhabiba Firdausy, and the last digit of my student number is 77. Next slide, please. Okay, so today we are going to talk about Chapter 3, Memory and Information Processes. This chapter was taken from Handbook of Psychology. The next slide, please. Okay, so the first one, we are going to talk about an information processing view of learning and cognition. Next slide. To talk about how does the human mind work and what happens when someone learns or when someone solves a problem. According to the information processing view, human mind works by forming mental representation and applying cognitive processes. So, for example, when you read a paragraph, you will form a series of mental representation by applying appropriate cognitive processes, such as mentally selecting important ideas. So, when you read a text or a passage, you are going to select what kind of information that you will get, and you are going to relate that with your prior knowledge. Next slide, please. On the next slide, okay, in this slide, we are going to talk about historical overview. In historical overview, there are two views, which is the first one is associationist view and also Gestalt view. Now let's talk about that one by one. So according to associationist view, the content of cognition consists of nodes, associations between them, and the process of cognition consists of the strengthening and weakening of associations. As an example, in Thorndike conducted a study of animal learning. So he put a hungry cat in a wooden box. So the cat could escape by pulling a hanging loop of string that opened a door, allowing the cat to get out and eat some nearby food. Before the cat successfully pulling out the string, the cat showed some extraneous behavior. But on the D-Day, when the cat successful, the cat shows what is that? Less number of extraneous behavior. And let's talk about the Gestalt view. So according to coherent structures and the process of cognition consists of building them. As an example, Kohler on 1925 placed an ape in a pan with crates and the ground and a bunch of bananas hanging overhead out of reach. Kohler observed that the ape looked around and then suddenly placed the crates on top of one another to form a ladder, leading to the bananas, allowing the ape to climb the stairs and grab the bananas. According to Kohler, the ape learned by reorganizing the objects in the situation so they fit together in a way that accomplished the goal. Next slide, please. Okay, now we are going to talk about two views of information processing theory. Next slide. So there are two views of information processing. The first one is classical view. So according to the classical view, humans are processors of information. Information is a commodity that can be transferred from one mind to another as a series of symbols, while processing involves applying an algorithm to information such that a series of symbols is manipulated according to a step-by-step procedure. And then how about constructivist view? So the constructivist view is based on the knowledge construction metaphor, in which The human mind is a sort of construction zone in which learners actively create their own knowledge based on integrating what is presented and what they already know. So, according to the constructivist view, learners are sense makers who construct knowledge. Knowledge is a mental representation that exists in a human mind. Construction involves cognitive processing at sense-making, including attending to relevant portions of the presented material, mentally organizing the material into a coherent structure, and mentally integrating the material with relevant existing knowledge. On the next slide, we are going to talk about major contributions of information processing theory. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are two major contributions of information processing theory. The first one is cognitive processes, and the second one is mental representation, which talk about types of knowledge. Now let's talk about it one by one. Now let's talk about major contributions of information processing theory. The first one, we are going to talk about cognitive processes, which focus on cognitive task analysis. A fundamental contribution of information processing theory is cognitive task analysis techniques, which used for describing the cognitive processes that a person must carry out to accomplish a cognitive task. Based on a cognitive problem can be broken down into five basic steps. First, encoding. So in encoding, reading and forming a mental representation of the words and accompanying punctuation. Second, interfering. So in interfering, what is that? It is can be by determining the relation between the A term and the B term. The third is mapping by determining what the C term is and how it corresponds to the A term. For example, the A term is kind of animal that makes sounds, and the C term is another kind of animal that makes sounds. Fourth, applying. So applying means applying the relational rule to the C term. For example, the sound that C term makes is, what is that? And the fifth is responding. So responding is physically making the response such as writing meow or circling the correct answer meow on a list. So for example, the students listen to the C term, which is meow. And on the D term, the students are going to write the sounds that they hear. Now let's talk about mental representation, which talk about types of knowledge. So according to processing approach, knowledge is at the center of cognition and learning is the construction of knowledge. While memory is the storage of knowledge and thinking is the logical manipulation of knowledge. Therefore, information processing theories have analyzed the types of knowledge. First, factual knowledge means simple descriptions of an object or element like apples are red. Next, conceptual knowledge. This knowledge involves relations among elements such as classification, cause and effect models, explanatory principles, and organizing generalization. Another one is procedural knowledge, which involves a procedure, for instance, the step-by-step specification of how to do something. Lastly, metacognitive knowledge that involves strategies for how to coordinate one's cognitive processing, for example, knowing how to monitor the quality of one's essay writing activity. From the types above, it can be seen that knowledge is a mental representation that exists only in human mind. Next slide, please. Okay, the next one we are going to talk about cognitive system, architecture of the cognitive system. So in this topic, there are two sub theme two. The first one is an information processing model. So what is that? Human information processing system consists of three memory cores, five basic cognitive processes, and two channels of knowledge representation. The three memory stores are, oh, wait a moment. The three memory stores are sensory memory, which has sound forms, working memory. So the first one is working memory, where a limited number of elements of the presented material are stored. And the second one is what is that long-term memory, where large amounts of knowledge are stored for long periods of time. Now let's talk about five cognitive processes. So in the cognitive processes, it is about selecting image and words, organizing image and words, and integrating. The cognitive processes means ears and eventually represented in verbal code. And the visual or pictorial channel or materials enter the cognitive system through the eyes and eventually is represented in pictorial code. For example, um, just like a spoken word enters the cognitive system through the ears, resulting in a short-lasting acoustic sensation in auditory sensory memory. If the learner generates visual representation based on the sound, for example, imagining a dog when the word dog is spoken, this process of sound-based moves to image-based. If the learner pays attention, parts of the lesson, students will have the cognitive process of selecting image and the resulting representation in visual working memory is a collection of image that can be called an image. If the learner generates verbal representation based on the image, for example, mentally saying dog when a picture of a dog is processed or the printed letters for dog are read silently, will be resulting representation in visual working memory is a coherent structure that can be called as a pictorial model. The final cognitive process integrating the result of this representation based on visual and verbal representations of the presented material, as well as relevant prior knowledge. Overall, the construction of knowledge requires that the learner select relevant image and sounds from the presented material, organize them into coherent pictorial and verbal representations, and integrate the pictorial and verbal representations with each other and with prior knowledge. And then let's talk about three assumptions underlying the model. So the information processing model is based on three assumptions from the cognitive science of learning. The dual channel assumption, human possesses separate information processing channels for visual pictorial material and auditory verbal material. For example, printed words and pictorial material. For example, just like illustration, graphics, animation, and also video. This assumption believes that students perform better on the transfer task when they listen to an explanation and view corresponding animation when they only listen to the explanation. Next slide, please. Now we are going to talk about information processing and instruction. Next slide. Uh, in processing the information, there are three sub things. The first one is information processing in reading a passage. So there are four component processes of reading comprehension tasks: selecting, organizing, integrating, and monitoring. Selecting involves paying attention to the most relevant portions of the passage. The other process is organizing, which involves taking the relevant pieces of information and mentally connecting them into a coherent structure. For example, some possible structures are to organize the material like cause and effect sequence, while integrating involves connecting the incoming knowledge with existing knowledge from one's long-term memory. This involves activating relevant prior knowledge and assimilating the incoming information. The last is monitoring, which involves a metacognitive process of judging whether the newly constructed knowledge makes sense. For example, in comprehension monitoring, readers continually ask themselves whether the passage makes, whether parts contradict one another, and whether parts contradict their past experience. And then the next one is about information processing in writing an essay. So Hayes in 1996 analyzed the essay writing task in three component processes: planning, translating, and reviewing. So in planning, it involves mentally creating ideas for the essay or generating, while developing an outline structure for the essay and considering how best to communicate with the intended audience. For example, the learner may remember specific events from his or her summer vacation, may decide to present them in chronological order under the same too much of good thing, and may decide that the best way to communicate is through humor. The next is translating. This process involves actually putting words on paper, such as through writing, typing, or dictating. For example, the learner may sit a word processor and begin to type. The other process is reviewing, which involves detecting and correcting errors in what has been written. For example, the learner may read over a sentence and decide it needs to be made more specific. And the last one is information processing. Mayer analyzed the task in four component processes involved in cognitive processes to solve word problems. Translate by doing translating, integrating, planning, and executing. The first one is translating. It involves building a mental representation for each sentence in the problem, while integrating means building a mental representation of the entire situation presented in the problem. Next, planning involves creating a strategy for solving the problem, such as breaking a problem into parts. The last one is executing. This component involves carrying out a plan resulting in the production of an answer. These findings encourage the idea that students can learn to improve the way they process mathematical problems. Future research on the psychology of subject matter is likely to provide detailed analysis of the cognitive processes needed for success on a variety of academic tasks, to uncover individual differences, and to discover instructional techniques for fostering the development of appropriate learning skills. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, that's all for my presentation. Thank you so much. And any question?
Yes, Nurhabiba, I want to ask you.
Yes, please.
Okay. Uh, why do you think teachers should understand about this memory and information process?
Okay, thank you, Fanny. So, I think the reason why is because in teaching, teacher will not only work with the intelligence of the students, but also work with many aspects like behavior, memory, and so on. Especially in helping the students to understand the lesson, the teacher should know how the brain works and how to use the brain memory wisely. Since we know that every student has different brain memory capacity. So in order to help the students in learning, we can analyze some techniques that can help the students to remember the topic in a fun way and effective way. Did I answer your question, Penny?
Yes, Nurhabiba, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there another question?
Nur Habibah, I want to ask question.
Yes, Winnie, please.
Uh, okay. In association and gestalt view, they use animals such as cat and an ape to help them doing the research. So, do you think that animal behavior in solving the problem is the same?
Okay, thank you. All right. I think it is almost this works better than animals. So in difficult situations, mostly we always can find a way to solve it, or when we fail many times, we can learn something in order to not get the failure again. And it is the same with the response that animal gave in those fields. Did I answer your question,
Yes, Nur
Winnie?
Habibah, thank you.
Okay. Okay, I will wait for one more question. The last one. Does anyone
Nurhabiba, I want to
want to
ask
ask
you.
again?
Nurhabiba, I want to ask you.
Yes, Nadia, please.
My question is one of the model above. There is one
Yes,
mention that
Nadia.
student is one of the model above. There is one mention that students perform and understand better when they study by seeing or listening to some colorful picture or video. Do you have the same opinion with this? Thank you, Nurhabiba.
Okay. Yeah, I absolutely agree with this theory because we, especially kids, are interested in seeing something colorful, fun, or something that is interactive. So, yeah, instead of keep listening to the explanation from the teacher, it will be better to use some tools that can make the students enjoy the lesson more. For example, just like watching a video or seeing a picture. Did I answer your question, Nadia?
Yes, Nur.
Okay, Nadia, did I answer your question, Nadia?
Yes, thank you, Nurhabiba.
Okay, all right. I think that's all for my presentation. Thank you so much, guys, for your attention. Lastly, let me close. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.